evening. Hello. Good evening, everybody. Thank you very much for coming. We're very happy tonight to bring Shinzen Young to this lecture series, which has a tremendous diverse group of people speaking. Shinzen is unique in a sense of the way I was introduced to him was that somebody told me that all the teachers that I had were dead, because at the time I was very much interested in Alan Watt and Krishnamurti and in Buckminster Fuller. And on the radio there was Roy of Hollywood on Thursday nights from midnight to 6 a.m. Playing Alan Watts, and one day he said that now we have somebody live and living, and you could listen to that person, which was very attractive to me to listen to. And this has been a tremendous force, even helping us with our firstborn, helping us have our first child by separating pain from suffering. So he's been a great pinnacle in our family life, and I think he's wonderful to as a resource to all of us. Ironically, though, now, after all these years, Shinzen has come back again to actually help us dealing with the dying. And it's pretty ironic that now we have a group that he's been helping us trying to deal with family members or friends that have somebody in the family that may be dying, or somebody that is in hospice and need help. So the circle goes complete. Without further ado, I give you our great teacher, Shinzen Young.
Thank you, Maroon. Okay. So, can everybody hear okay? We're going to talk about, how's my mic? Is it okay? Okay. We're going to talk about how our sense of self arises in various circumstances, and what to do when our sense of self arises. And I'm going to present to you a paradigm for our sense of self as a wave, hence our streaming theme in the series. The sense of self as a wave as opposed to the sense of self as a particle. Now, the way I like to do things is not just to talk about the theory of them, but to actually always give people tangible experiences. So we're going to actually do some procedures to explore consciousness before we even begin the talk, so you'll have an experiential basis for understanding some of the terminology that I'm going to use. I'm going to guide you in a kind of meditation. Now, one of the things that we do when we meditate that's important is to have a good posture. Chairs are not ideal, but you can work with them. I strongly encourage you, I'll sort of show you a good posture. A good posture is not with your back against the back of the chair, but freestanding. And your shoulders relaxed, but your spine very straight. Now, if you're not used to this, most of us are used to sort of slouching in the chair. It might take a couple minutes to adjust, acclimatize to it. But if you slouch back in the chair, or if you let your head sort of drop, you will find very quickly that instead of experiencing a state of meditation, you will experience what? A state of subtle or gross sleepiness. I sometimes call it the Zen lurch. Okay? And this person said that. Okay. That's not meditation. So I will ask you to sort of work with that posture piece, and even Even if it feels a little awkward initially, it's will pay off in the end. And what I'm going to do is sort of lead you in a little guided meditation. Are the sound effects ready to go? We're all set? The self appears in many guises. We have the sense of self as perceiver. It's true, isn't it, that we all have a sense of when we look at a flower or another person, we have a sense of an I'm over here looking at an it over there, don't we? It's true, isn't it? This is nothing esoteric. So one of the facets of self is self as perceiver. We're going to explore how the sense of self as perceiver arises by paying attention to how we listen to sound and how your sense of I'm here listening to the sound over there arises. So I'm going to guide you through a sequence of focuses. And as I do that, we're going to play various sound effects. Some of these, I think we've got an unwarranted sound effect right back here. Some of these sound effects will be pleasant. Some of them will be neutral. Some of them may be a little bit on the unpleasant side. After all, in daily life, things aren't all pleasurable. And we're going to explore in a very specific and systematic way how the sense of of an I over here listening to the it over there arises. That's going to be the exercise. So if we're all set to go, Maroon, are we on the air? Or you want me to give it a few more minutes?
No, I think
We're ready to roll? Okay. Take a moment and close your eyes. Can we get rid of the background static? I'm sorry? We'll see if we can get rid of that background. Anyway, until that happens, we'll consider that one of the sounds. So take a moment, close your eyes, let your body settle. And I'd like you to bring your awareness to your body and simply keep your awareness in your body, moment by moment. You'll find that if you get distracted, you'll get distracted into mental images. You'll get distracted into internal conversations. And if that happens, then bring your awareness back to your body for just a moment. Well, our sound effects aren't going to work, but that's okay. We'll go to plan B. Okay, so now you've spent some time focusing on your body. Now, ask yourself, how do you know where you are right now? You probably have some vague or perhaps specific mental images associated with your present environment. If you don't, take a moment, open your eyes, sort of look around and then close your eyes. And then once again ask yourself, where am I? In other words, contact whatever mental or images or spatial awareness you have of your present surroundings. And sort of rest in those images of your present surroundings. Notice that what will distract you is body sensations, so ignore them. Ignore internal talk, just let it be in the background. And be aware that you have some sense of your surroundings based on your short-term visual memory. Also be aware that when you hear sounds in the environment, somebody moves, somebody stirs, that you may get a clear or subtle image activation from that sound. It triggers an image of its source, or an attempt to form an image of its source. Now, also be aware, if you happen to be pulled into a memory, you'll probably get some fleeting, vague picture of the scene. If you get pulled into a fantasy, once again, we don't call it imagination for nothing. You'll probably get some image. And if you find yourself planning something, well, you may get a picture of the planning. So when you're aware of your present environment through short-term visual memory or through image activity triggered by sounds, when you're in the present, when you're in the past, when you're in the future, when you're in fantasy, there may be some mental image, however fleeting, in front of or behind your eyes or projected elsewhere. Notice also that when you have body sensations, you may also get mental pictures of that body part. So there are a lot of sources of mental imagery. For a moment, be aware of any and all mental images that might arise. And if no mental images arise, then be aware that your screen is pleasantly blank. Okay, good. Now, bring your awareness to your internal conversation. You probably hear them somewhere in your head, either in general in your head or perhaps in a more specific location, in the center or on the right side or in the ears. Rest your awareness where it's convenient to listen to internal conversation. Let mental pictures, body sensations be in the background. Let external sounds be in the background. And moment by moment, be aware, are you thinking in clear words, repeatable sentences? Is your internal conversation completely silent? Or is there something in between, a sort of subtle subterranean stream? You can't quite pin down what the conversation is about, but the gears are turning deep down. Moment by moment, your verbal thinking process will be in one of these three states: clearly active, speaking words, subtly active, or silent. Rest your awareness on that internal talk activity. And simply allow it to assume whatever form it wants. Good. Now let go of that and once again bring your awareness to your body sensations, physical touches, emotional feelings, anything that's in the body. But let mental pictures and mental talk be in the background just for now. And let body sensation occupy the foreground. And greet each body sensation with a kind of gentle matter-of-factness, giving it permission to well up and subside, to last or die away, with its own rhythm. Good. Now let go of that. And bring your awareness to your mental screen. For most people, this is in front of or behind the eyes. That is the place where images associated with memory, planning, and fantasy arise, typically. Be aware also that images may arise projected on your body, triggered by body sensations. Be aware that images may be projected out into space as the result of hearing sounds or remembering where you are. Be aware of these and any other image activity. And if there's no image activity, then fine. Be aware that your mental screen is blank. But as soon as your thoughts go to the past, present, future, fantasy, as soon as you're thinking of a person or a physical object or a place, you probably have some image activity, although it may be very fleeting and subtle. Subtle is significant. So we're selecting out the visual component of thought, allowing it to activate and deactivate without any particular agenda. If you get even slightly sleepy, straighten your spine. Sit up. It's a little bit of a challenge if you're not used to it. We tend to go to sleep. Remember, Buddha means awake. And now let go of your focus on visual thinking and bring your awareness to verbal thinking. Place your awareness in your two ears, but instead of listening outward to external sound, listen inward to the sound of your self-talk, which could be clearly active, stating words. It could be subtly active, or it could be dead silence, pleasant silence. Okay, good. Now bring your awareness to your body again. And keeping your awareness in your body, slowly open your eyes. Eyes open, but awareness back in your body. And see if you can keep your awareness a little bit in your body as we move into a different activity now. This little focusing exercise is over, and we're going to begin to have some talk and discussion. But as we talk and discuss, see if you can keep a little awareness back in your body. If I say something that you like, you may feel some pleasant sensation there. If I say something you disagree with or that you find confusing, you might find some unpleasant sensations there in the body. So, what did we do? Say what? Oh no! Oh, you felt the thirst in the body. Very good. Then you're getting it. What we did was pay attention selectively, first to our body sensations, then our thinking in pictures, then our thinking in words, and then we went through and did it again. You may have found that the second time through it was a little bit easier to detect things and so forth. So what was the purpose of this exercise? Oh, by the way, any chance we're going to get the sound to work, do you think, if in the break time without the noise? I'm just asking, but okay. Well, let me tell you what I had planned for you, which we had to sort of change a little bit. I had planned for you an experiment that I often suggest to people in order to understand how the sense of self as perceiver arises. Here's the experiment. Go to a place where there's a lot of different sounds, sit down, and first monitor, and then pay attention to the sounds. And then monitor each time you hear a sound. Does that sound trigger a feeling reaction in your body or not? Obviously, it's got to be one or the other. If you hear a bird chirp, you might smile. If you hear a car backfire, you might jump. If you hear somebody talking about you negatively, you might feel anger flavors in your body, or fear flavors, or teary hurt flavors in the body. All of these would be examples of body sensations triggered by the external sound. Of course, it's entirely possible that for any given sound, there would be no body sensation triggered, but got to be one or the other. For each sound that would be perceived, there either would or would not be a body feeling. Do you agree with me that that is logically the case? Would logically make sense? It's not some deep metaphysical conundrum, okay? It seems to me quite reasonable. Analogously, the next step is to look at your mental image reactions. If when you hear the bird chirp, do you see a picture of the bird? Maybe, or maybe not. Either is fine in this exercise. We're not trying to get you to see the pictures. But the exercise would ask you to be aware if there was or was not a mental image triggered by each sound event around you. The third part of the exercise would be each time you hear a sound, does it trigger a mental comment or not? You hear the bird chirp and you find yourself saying, I love that bird. Or, I hate that bird. You hear somebody talking about you, and then outside, and in your own voice you say, oh my God, they're talking about me. How dare they talk about me like that? Oh my God, that's sentence number 1. They're talking about me, that's sentence number 2. How dare they talk about me like that? That's sentence number 3. That is 3 distinct internal sentences generated in sequence by that external sound. Or you might hear an external sound and it completely turns off all your internal comments. There's no particular clear or subtle internal verbal mental activity in response to that sound. So the experiment would be first to monitor whether each sound does or does not trigger body sensations, and to do that a whole bunch of times. Then do the same thing with mental images a whole bunch of times. Then do the same thing with internal talk a whole bunch of times. That all makes sense, doesn't it, what I'm saying? Now, what you've done is you've teased out the 3 types of reaction that you could have to the sound. What would be the next logical step in this experiment? What do you think? What would be the next logical step? If we want to explore how your reactions to sound.
Physical reaction?
Well, physical reaction would be your body reaction in terms of physical sensation. Of course, you could have a reaction in the sense of saying something or doing something, but we're not looking at that right now. Well, I'll give you a hint. We looked at 3 dimensionally independent variables. We looked at them individually, didn't we? What would be the next logical step? Look at them collectively. So the next exercise would be, each time you hear a sound, be aware whether there is or is not a body sensation reaction. It could be one of 2. For each of those 2, you could either have or not have a mental image reaction. So that gives you 2 times 2, or 4 possibilities. And for each of those 4 possibilities, you could either have or not have an internal sentence triggered. That gives you 4 times 2, or 8 possibilities. Did you do the math? Am I correct? I would claim that if we take body sensation, mental image, and internal reaction as our basic variables, our basic subjective elements, that with regard to each experience of external sound, there are exactly 8 possible reactive states. Not 7 and not 9. Okay? And what would those 8 possible reactive states be? Well, you could, now, for example, the annoying sound. Do you feel something in your body, okay, that it annoys you? At the same time, if you had your eyes closed, maybe you'd see an image of people fiddling around with the computers or whatever, okay, or maybe not. And you'd be saying, oh God, I hope this is going to end pretty soon because it's distracting me from the talk that I came to hear. So you would have both body, image, and talk reactions. That's one possible event. Or the bird chirps, you smile, your body reacted. You see a picture of the bird, and you think, oh, what a nice bird. But do you think it would be possible that maybe you just have a body reaction without the image talk? At least theoretically that could happen. Could you just have the image reaction without a particular feeling in the body or any comment? Sure. Could you just have the comment without a body or image reaction? Sure. So let's see. You could have any one of 3 possible single occurrences. Do you think that you could sort of see the picture and have a comment but not have a body feeling? That's possible, isn't it? You don't think so. Let's say it is theoretically possible. But perhaps for you, you would discover that every time you had the picture and the image, that there was a feeling in the body. So that although it is theoretically possible, you might discover that almost inevitably there's a body feeling that goes with it. However, I will say that another person might find that sometimes they do just get the picture and the talk without the body. Other people might find that that's the case for them. Let's see. Could you have an image and also a body reaction without talk? I think that, at least theoretically, that could happen. And you could also have maybe talk and a body reaction without a picture. So that's another three possibilities. Then you could have all three arising at once, and then you could have. There is an eighth possibility, isn't there? What's the eighth possibility? No reaction at all. There's a sound, and there's just the sound. It does not trigger a picture of its source. It does not trigger a feeling one way or the other, and it does not trigger any comment. So, does it make sense that at least theoretically we could monitor in real time our reactions to sound in terms of 8 possible states, because we have 3 binary variables. Each binary variable can either be on or off by definition, so that gives us 2 to the third or 8 possible states of this system. Makes sense, doesn't it? My claim would be that that is indeed the case. Now, in science, you do an experiment over and over and over and over and over again. Why? Because you want to make sure that statistically unusual events get a chance to occur. You may discover, for example, that in most cases you get just a body reaction or just an image reaction. But if you did this experiment over and over again, the laws of probability dictate, I think we probably just need to try to kill it. The laws of probability dictate that every once in a while you would get no reaction at all, just natural. The reactions are on a bell curve, which differs from person to person. But anybody, if they do an experiment like this long enough, will have an experience where there's just sound and no internal talk. When I say talk, I mean self-talk, okay? When I say image, it means mental image. When I say body, it means anything in the body. And so I talk about body, image, talk. You can remember it by the acronym BIT, BIT. Now we're talking about a bitmap of the self, aren't we? You understand the pun? Maybe, maybe not, okay. My friends call me Bitman. This is the basic paradigm that I use in teaching people how to understand how their sense of self arises, how to become, and what is a healthy freedom from self, what is a healthy expression of self, what is a healthy merging of inside and outside, and what is an unhealthy merging of inside and outside. I find working with body, image, talk to be very useful paradigm. Now we get to the first interesting result of the experiment. If you did this long enough and you started to get experiences of just sound without it triggering any reaction at all, if you look back at that very instant and ask yourself, was anybody here listening to this sound? Was there any sense of an I perceiving an it over there? We're just talking about the unusual case where there's no bit reactions. What do you think? Do you think that you would have a sense of a self listening to the sound or not? Well, there's no way to really know until you do an experiment. But I can tell you, if you do the experiment exactly as I have outlined it, every human being will be forced to the conclusion that under those circumstances, there was only sound and no one perceiving. Under those circumstances. Try it and see for yourself. I don't ask you to believe it because I said it or anybody else said it. This is an experiment. You'd have to do the experiment though. You can't tell me, you cannot claim, no, that's not true until you have done my experiment. Then you can claim it didn't work. But then if you ask me, if I started investigating and you said it didn't work, I think we would discover that you didn't follow one of the instructions. Now, that's already rather an audacious claim and a rather radical shift in paradigm. Because our language deals with the sense of self as a particle that abides and is always there. But if it winks in and out, if it's not always there, well, that's not the way our language, we talk about an I like it's a persistent, particulate thing. Well, this experiment, first of all, challenges that paradigm right off the bat. It's not there sometimes, at least occasionally, just under natural circumstances. If you were to do this experiment even more frequently, so that you would get a naturally occurring event that's even rarer, it gets even more interesting. What would happen if for 5 or 10 or 15 seconds there were to be just sound without any body image or talk reactions to it? I already claimed that there would be no sense of self. What would become of your sense of self if that lasted for more than a second or two? In other words, instead of being an instant where there's just sound, what if there was a duration where there's just sound? What would happen to your sense of identity? Well, I'll give away the answer. You could try it and see if it's true for yourself. Your sense of identity would shift into the sound, and you would say, my God, I was that sound. The boundary between inside and outside went away for real. Not as a warm, fuzzy, new agey concept of oneness, but an actual, tangible experience that shakes heaven and earth for you. Because if you could be that sound, well, how about my teacher, the first koan, he's a Zen teacher, Joshu Sasaki Roshi. First koan he usually gives is when you see the flower, when you look at the flower, how do you manifest yourself as the flower? Okay? And then he'll do it. He'll look at the flower that way. All he's doing is allowing it to flower without any sense of a personal self arising. Then he inhabits and lives the life of that flower for 5-10 seconds. You actually see him doing it. His body sort of moves a little bit like a flower, the way an infant's body moves when it looks at something, because of course it's naturally doing that. It doesn't have it has some body reactions, but a lot of the time it's simply becoming its parent or whatever it sees. So you would have not just an experience that there's no thing called a self and there's no persistent particle in there, but you would start to get a sense of an elastic identity that can stretch out and actually become what you ordinarily conceive of as other and for real. Well, do you think that that would somewhat shake your concepts of your own personal identity? Yes, indeed it would. So we're already getting to a major paradigm shift in the sense of self. Identity is in some way elastic. Well, why would anybody want to do this? Okay, these are interesting intellectual experiments. Perhaps they produce some psychological and philosophical seminal seeds for discussion. But is there anything practical that would come out of exercises like this? Well, what would we call practical? How about freedom from fear? Have you ever noticed that there's a one-to-one correspondence between our sense of separateness and our vulnerability to fear? There is. Take a look. Whenever there's separateness, there's some sense of fear. Whenever there's some sense of fear, there's some sense of separateness. You can't fear that which is already you. So it would, or if it would, the sense of elastic identity would already begin to bring some freedom from fear, but it's far broader than that. Far broader than that. Because what about our sense of individual mortality? Our sense that, oh my God, I'm going to die, I'm not going to exist. Well, it does rather depend on how we define I now, doesn't it? For example, if every day you have dozens and dozens of experiences of becoming the so-called other, then when you go to sleep at night and you look back and you say, who am I? Well, yes, I'm who I usually am, but I was also all those other things, and for real. And if you live day after day after day like that, well, then your sense of identity starts to really become the same as the entire universe. I emphasize again, for real, not as a warm, fuzzy concept. Because warm, fuzzy, guess what happens to warm, fuzzy concepts of oneness? If you leave this talk and you find that somebody has stolen your car. I promise you, however warm and fuzzy the concept of spiritual unity may be, you will be living in a world of great separation. They've got my car and I ain't. However, if you did the kind of experiments that I'm describing over and over and over again, you could still maintain a very real sense that you still own that car, even while those thieves are driving it. That's not to say that you would acquiesce to being ripped off. You certainly would go to the police and take appropriate measures. But that's that fundamental sense of I lost something would be much less if you, as the result of this kind of investigation. Already this gets rather interesting and challenges our ordinary perceptions. Basically, what I'm claiming is that in order to have the ordinary sense of limited self as perceiver, we need to have these body image talk reactions arising. Now how about, but of course the sense of self involves things other than I am perceiver. The sense of self involves things like I'm in control, or I will, or I desire. Let's say you desire something that is not good. Anybody here desires something in some big or little way that really is not too good to desire? Come on, every one of us does, right? Every single human being in some big or small way really desires something that our better self tells us no. Maybe it's smoking cigarettes, maybe it's abusing a substance, maybe it's abusing another human being that has become habitual, a way of dealing with our anger. But every human being has behaviors that they would like to change, big or small. As I say, it could be biting your nails or beating your wife. What about the urge to do something that you really don't want to do? How does that urge come up in terms of tangible sensory phenomenology? How do you know you want to do it? Might it involve body feelings? Yeah? A discomfort that will go away if you do it. A remembered pleasure that will get bigger if you do it. Follow what I'm saying? Carrot and stick sensations. Okay? If you don't do behavior X, you're going to have to feel agitated or uncomfortable in some way. If you do behavior X, oh, remember how good it felt to do behavior X? Who's remembering how good it felt? Your body is remembering. When you smile, okay, now think of that behavior. Okay, and now you're going to smile. That's a body sensation. The body's remembering how pleasant that behavior was. Body sensation could be involved. Could a mental picture be involved? Could you see yourself doing it? Could talk be involved? Ah, come on, you deserve it. Okay, just one more time. Right? Could all three be involved? Now, I'll ask you an interesting question. Suppose that you had the ability to track moment by moment when this negative urge comes up. You could track whether it was just body, just image, just talk, whether it was image and body, talk and body, image and talk, whether it was all three. And of course, if it was none, there'd be no urge now, would there? Suppose you were able to keep track of this perfectly. The goings and comings of bit that constitute the negative urge. Do you think that that might have an effect on your ability to not have to act on that urge? Well, you don't know. I'm just asking the question. But you probably suspect, because I've brought up the issue, you probably suspect that I would claim that it will have an effect. And in point of fact, I claim that. If you monitor body image talk that constitutes the urge and keep track of it, you won't have to give in to the urge. Conversely, the minute you give in to the urge, ask what happened to your ability to track the bit flow. And you will discover that at the moment you gave in to the urge, you completely lost all specific contact with those sensory elements. It stopped being body sensation, mental image, and internal talk pattern and turned into a force pattern that you could not resist and identified with. Try the experiment. Over and over again, you'll find it's always true. It's always true. So the ability to keep track of these things is not just an issue of feeling good subjectively or reducing suffering subjectively. It also relates to issues of objective behavior. Because as I say, body, image, talk, these three elements are associated not only with the sense of I'm listening, but also with the sense of I want. Well, that's very interesting. And not only are they associated with it, but apparently, at least if my claim is true, the ability, the skill to keep track of all of this is very related to our ability to have some sort of control over our behavior. How important is it to reduce suffering? Well, just wait till the next time you suffer a little bit, and you'll notice it's quite important. How important is it to improve behaviors? Well, just wait till you do something inappropriate next, and look back and say, why did I do that? And you'll remember how important that is. If it turns out that the skills of keeping track of these internal sensory elements are related to reducing subjective suffering and improving objective behavior, then this is something pretty important for any human being to know. Now, let's see here. It appears, at least based on the experiments that I've done, that the arising of body image talk is necessary for the sense of a sort of limited self. But here's a very interesting question. In science, in mathematics, particularly in science in general and in philosophy, there is a distinction between necessary causes and sufficient causes. Basically what it means is a necessary cause means if it's not there, the effect won't be there. So if there's no body image talk reactions, you don't get a sense of self. A sufficient cause means if it is there, you get the effect. So here's a very interesting question. The sense of a limited self, our usual sense of separate self, will it arise automatically as soon as there are body image talk reactions? In other words, as you're sitting here listening to me, you're having body sensations, okay? You're having mental images, you're having internal talk, whether you're aware of it or not. Some of it may be so subtle that you can't detect it. Is the mere arising of that enough to produce the limited self? Well, we don't know. It could be, it could not be. Amazingly enough, the arising of your body image talk reactions in and of themselves do not produce a limited sense of self. This is where we get to a very, very subtle point. It turns out that for the ordinary sense of limited identity to arise, three things have to happen. You have to, you have to have an arising of body image and talk, and they have to get tangled together so that there's a loss of contact with them, and they have to be inappropriately fixated for a few seconds. When all of those three things take place, the usual particulate sense of self will arise. If you have no body image talk reactions, the usual particulate sense of self fails to arise, and after a few seconds, a sense of oneness of inside and outside does arise. If body image and talk arises, but you have a clear awareness of the components, and you don't hold on to them or interfere with them in any way whatsoever, either to suppress or to latch on, then guess what? You can have yada-da-yada-da going like crazy in your head. You can be full of all sorts of physical touches and emotional feelings in the body, and you can have a plethoric array of pictures from past, present, and future, and there is no sense of limited self whatsoever. Well, I would say that that's a pretty outrageous claim. Because the claim, therefore, is that the pivotal condition that causes our limited identity, do you understand what I'm talking about? It's the I, me, mine that is the center of almost every human being's world. Okay? Why does anything matter at all to you? At all? My career, my reputation, my health situation, my financial situation, my intellectual prowess. All these things matter because there's a sense of I, me, and mine. If we are saying something that is a fundament, that says that makes us look at that I, me, and mine in a radically new way, we're saying something that makes us look at the entire world that we know in a new way. This is not a small thing. This is fundamental research. Out of a single fundamental development in physics, 10,000 practical applications come, 100,000 practical applications. If you crack a fundamental issue, you've done something big. If you show a human being that their limited sense of self is dependent on unconsciousness and inappropriate holdings, you're showing that human being something awesome, absolutely awesome, in terms of thousands and thousands of day-to-day problems that suddenly become tractable from this new paradigm which were intractable previously. So what happens when you have yada yada yada? Your body's full of sensations, and your mind's and you're full of mental images, and there is perfect awareness, no unconsciousness, and no interference. What happens is that yes, a sense of self is arising, but not like a particle, not like a billiard ball that is rigid, scratchable, smashable, and fundamentally separate, but more like a stream, a wave. Okay? It is an undulatory self that can interact with any other wave in the universe as a wave. In fact, will automatically interact. Two streams of water, two ice cubes will automatically bounce off, and guess what? They'll damage each other. Two streams of the same substance, but in the fluid phase, will automatically merge into a single stream. Bang the river as much as you want, you will not shatter it. Cut it as much as you want, you will leave no scars on it. When the sense of body image talk self arises and you have trained your mindfulness and equanimity, that is to say, your ability to detect the elements and your ability to not mess with them, not push them down or hold on to them, then the sense of self arises like in an undulatory or river-like fluid form, and then the hammer blows of life and the scratches that, the scratches and scrapings that we're subject to when people say hateful things, or when people we love can't be helped, or when this happens or that happens, we don't have to be wounded because a wave immediately reheals. It just incorporates the energy into it. It is a kind of vulnerability that is so radical that you are, in a healthy way, invulnerable. It is spirit, for real. Not a warm fuzzy, not a concept, not even a shamanic vision. The warm fuzzies are just certain kinds of body sensations. Okay? The spiritual concepts are just that, talk. Even the vision of the gods is just mental images. But what is all of that made out of? The ordinary images and the images of the gods. The touch of your clothes or God touching your heart. Stray thoughts about this or that, or prayer or divine theologies. They're all made out of the same spirit stuff. But what we want is for people to experience that directly. Directly. And to experience that directly, well, everything has its price. The price to experience this directly is to give a little bit of time and energy to formal practice. It doesn't cost any money, but it does cost time and energy. It takes a little while to develop the kind of skills that I'm describing. So there is cost. Some of you may have a business background. You know there's a difference between cost and the cost of something and the value of something. Something may have a rather large cost, but you're very happy to pay that cost because the value is so huge. Relative to that value, the cost is almost trivial. Well, what I'm just, yes, it takes maybe a half an hour of time each day to develop mindfulness skills, maybe a couple retreats a year. You're going to have to subtract from your life. That's the cost. Now, what's the payoff? Well, I think you've gotten a little hint of the payoff. If it reduces your suffering by 50%, physical and emotional suffering across the board, forever and ever, is that enough of a payoff? That's realistic within enough 5, 10, 15 years of practice. But that's just the beginning. It also elevates your fulfillment with what is pleasurable. And most importantly, when you experience the self as a wave, that self links to all other waves in the universe, all of them. So as long as any heart beats in any kind of creature with a systole and a diastole, as long as tides flow on any planet, as long as the cores of galaxies and atoms contract and the perimeters of galaxies and atoms expand as effusive clouds of stars or electrons, as long as that basic flux is in nature, you are that, for real. And when you encounter what cannot be humanly born, which we often, well not often, but will inevitably encounter in this life, guess what? If it's inhuman, you need to have a place that is, at least for a few minutes, beyond the human. Otherwise, you'll be damaged forever by being subject to an inhuman experience. But if you can abide in a fluid self, not only will you not be damaged, you will be empowered for the rest of your life. So there's a lot of practical consequence. It's not just theory. One last point. The discussion, which I know you're probably getting impatient by now, so that's, of course, body image talk arising, right? You have bodies saying, I'm fidgety, I'm sleepy. When's this going to end? That's the talk. Okay, you get the picture of getting up and getting a snack or something like that. The self is arising right now, right here and now, with these very elements. What if you kept track of it? What if you let it flow? What if you didn't get any liquid for a day? Do you think you'd have to suffer, theoretically? How about 2 days? How about 3 days? How about 4 days? No liquids. How about 4 days without liquids and without food? How about 4 days without liquids and without food in 110 degree sun? Think a human can do it? Oh yeah. Every summer, hundreds and hundreds of people all over North America will do exactly what I just described. Go for 4 days in the blazing sun without any food, without any water. Do you know what it is? Do you know what this is called? What's it called? It's called the sun dance. It is the central spiritual practice of the Plains Indians, and it has now spread to all tribes everywhere. How is this done? You think I'm making this up? Maybe you think I'm making this up. A doctor will tell you you'll be dead in 2 days. No, I'm not making this up. You probably will never see it because spectators are not allowed. But supporters are allowed. You can come and support people that do this, if you know people. And you can see with your own eyes that this can be done. And how is it done? Well, you must enter the fluid self to do this. You must drink your own exhaustion and thirst. How are you going to drink your own exhaustion and thirst and pain? Well, if it becomes fluid, it will nurture you. The ultimate recycling, that's how it's done. It is done. But in any event, everything that we have talked about so far is, in a sense, rather selfish. I've talked about, not entirely selfish, but in a sense, we've talked about reducing your suffering, elevating your fulfillment. When we talked about changing behavior, that's not selfish, because that's something that impacts on the outside world. But besides doing meditation or these kinds of meditation so that we can reduce our suffering and elevate our fulfillment, we do them for another reason. Because you notice that as the result of the experiment that I described, you would have actual experiences of oneness of inside and outside. That would tend to lead to a state of sort of caring about your outside world as though it were you. A kind of, a sense of stewardship for all of existence. But when you look out at existence, when you interact with people, what happens? You feel their poison and pain. The deeper you go into spiritual practice, the more poignantly you are aware of how much poison and pain is inside people. What to do? What to do in the moment-by-moment interactions throughout the day as you go through life? Well, if you spent years and years and years learning how to experience your own poison and pain in a fluid mode so that it becomes a release and a purification rather than a suffering, then guess what? When you pick up the poison and pain from the world in your moment-by-moment interactions with others, how do you pick it up? Body sensations, internal talk, mental image induced in you by the sufferings of others. And guess what? If you experience that in a fluid mode, as you are interacting with that person, although you may never speak overtly, a subtle magic is being done. Your body is communicating to their body, modeling how they can experience their pain in a liberated way. And people want to be around you, and they don't know why. They feel somehow relieved when they're around you. This is the subtle service that a liberated person can give constantly back into the world. In addition to more overt services like teach meditation or fight for social justice or whatever the overt service may be. The overt services, sometimes they work, sometimes they don't work. But the subtle service you can do constantly. This is the essence of compassion, compassio. You share the pain of the world, but not its suffering. You transmute, you detect, you take in, you transmute into a fluid experience, and then you radiate that out as an energy of liberation, love, and very, very subtle compassion. That is your little secret gift to each person you interact with, however casually. So the ultimate reason, so you might say that the cultivating of mindfulness and equanimity with regard to your body, image, and talk has as its initial goal to diminish suffering, elevate fulfillment, and bring about a sense of transcending, for real, the world. But the ultimate reason to transcend the world, the mature reason to transcend the world, will inevitably be so that you can more effectively serve the world. If you understand that the reason to that there's a lot of ways that people try to go beyond the limited self. A lot of ways that people try to do it, and most of them are not very healthy. What I'm trying to describe to you is a healthy way to do it, but I'm also trying to make very clear why to do it. It's not just that we want to go beyond the limited self so that we don't have to suffer a limited identity. If we go beyond the limited self in a really skillful way, it allows us to better serve all of the other selves in the universe. And if you understand that, then we say that you are spiritually mature. And there's a technical term in Buddhism for such a spiritually mature person. Some of you may know this term. It's called bodhisattva, Bodhisattva, as in this song by Steely Dan in Countdown to Ecstasy, the rock group. Bodhisattva, won't you take me by the hand? Bodhisattva, won't you take me by the hand? Would you show me the shine in your Japan, the sparkle of your China? Would you show me Bodhisattva, Bodhisattva, Bodhisattva? Then there's a whole cool riff that I can't do. Okay, that's the talk. And we're going to take a little stretch break and a pit stop break. It's now about 10 to 8. So let's, those of you that want to come back for freewheeling discussion, come back at 10 to 8 and we'll talk for a bit, and that will do it for the evening. Thank you. And by the way, I'm user friendly. If you want to come up and just schmooze in between, feel free to do so. Yes.
Rather obvious, just like we can use sound for this experiment.
Yes, we could use sight or anything else. Anything. Sight, smell, even touch.
Right.
You know, do you have a yes?
Second one is rather very serious and very important. What you just described is arising.
Okay, well, I thought I would take a few minutes if anybody had any things that they wanted to ask about, either theoretical or practical from your own life and such. If it's an area that I'm familiar with, I will respond. I like to get questions, so feel free. They'll have to use a mic? Okay. Okay, well, you'll do the Jerry Springer thing.
Thank you. I'm trying to understand on some level what you were discussing in terms of how do I apply this? These principles of sort of divorcing myself from my feelings, my images.
Okay. What would be an example of where would you want to apply it? Something
Anytime,
specific.
well, like for instance in traffic.
Okay, in
Very-
traffic,
get
let's
very
take that.
uptight
Yeah,
in
look,
traffic.
uptight in traffic, let's take that. Okay, first, let's do a little piece on languaging, okay? How you languaged it versus how I would language it. You actually said divorcing yourself from your thoughts and feelings, okay? Yes, in a sense, one is doing this because one is not limiting one's identity to the thoughts and feelings. But I'm not sure that I would exactly want to use the word divorcing, because it's more like you so completely own it that it no longer limits you. So it's almost the opposite of divorcing. It's almost like you're so married to it that you become free from it. Now, I know that that's very paradoxical. It takes a little while to get used to that idea. It's a process of escaping into rather than escaping from. So let's take the example, you're in traffic, okay? Well, what's annoying about being in traffic? You think, I'm late for the appointment, okay? So that would be some words that would come into your head. Now, if you just paid attention to what's coming up in your talk, you'd find, I'm late to the appointment. Why does all this traffic have to be here? Gee, I'm going to be embarrassed when I get there. You'd get one after another of these sentences. Now, let's say that you were aware of each one of those sentences rising up and passing away as a distinct event. While that sentence happened, you'd get some tension in your belly, You'd get some agitation perhaps down your arms. You'd get some, you might be surprised if you look carefully, you might feel teary, like a little baby crying over something. Very, very subtly around your eyes perhaps. You'd get a tightening in your jaw, maybe those are the body sensations. And those would come in with specific qualities in specific locations, one after another part of your body sort of lighting up. Maybe it would be intense in one area and then spread to other areas. There'd be like a splash and a ripple. So there would be different flavors, each with different locations, perhaps central locations with a more broad spread. And then, of course, there would be mental pictures. If you keep track of all of this, then you would discover that you wouldn't feel so bothered being caught in traffic, even though all these reactions to the traffic were happening. Does that make sense? That would be a practical application.
You're saying by just keeping track of my reactions, that it would have less impact on me?
Less suffering. That is exactly what I am saying.
I hear what you're saying, but I have trouble believing.
There's no reason you should believe it, except do some experiments for yourself and see if it's true. It's actually more the converse that becomes so important. What you'll discover is when you lose track is when you start to suffer. So here's the experiment to do if you want to convince yourself of this. Next time you are about to move into a situation that will be challenging, could be anything, okay, anything at all. You could even artificially create a situation that's challenging. But let's say there's a situation that is challenging, but you haven't moved into that situation yet. Before the situation becomes a challenge, put some awareness in your body, some awareness on your mental image, some awareness in your talk, and sort of watch things come and go. And then watch what happens as the situation becomes more challenging. You'll see that, of course, the body events will become more intense, the chatter will be louder and more frequent, the images more abundant, and so forth, as the challenge intensifies. That makes sense, doesn't it? But you're still keeping track. At some point, you may begin to suffer. You may begin to say, I can't handle this. You may begin to say, I've got to get out of this. Watch what happens at that moment to your ability to keep track of qualities and locations in the body and the comings and goings of verbal and visual thinking. Watch what happens to your ability at the moment when you say, I can't handle this, this must end, this is bad. Watch what happens and do this experiment over and over again. I'll give you, that's abstract, I'll give you something tangible. I had a student that had fear issues. Fear was dominated her life. And she wanted to work on fear. So I said, okay, let's do something that will induce fear. I mean, we're not going to just talk about it abstractly. We're going to work with it in the real world. So there was this little, how can I describe it? It was like a small carnival that had taken just an empty lot downtown in LA, and they put up, like rides. They brought it on a truck and they set it up. It wasn't like a big carnival, but they had rides, and some of them were pretty scary. Like they had this thing that it was like a Ferris wheel, but not the same because you were in a cage. And I'm not sure, but I don't know what it would be called, but it was designed in such a way that it as this Ferris wheel thing turned in one dimension, the cages would flip at right angles to that, orthogonally, which would give a very, very disorienting effect, because you're basically flipping in 2 dimensions simultaneously. It became particularly disorienting when you rode it at night and they made it go backwards. It produced this strong impression at each instant that the cage you were in had become disconnected and was flying out into the LA sky. I mean, it was like a really strong impression. Okay, so I said, okay, let's go to the neighborhood carnival. Let's go on some of the scary rides. It was like right down the street. It was like really convenient. And I'll give you guided meditation on the fear, and I'll also do the same meditation myself. So we went together, okay, and I said, okay, now, track the body sensations and name the locations, right? Face, chest, whole body, okay? She's naming the locations. I'm doing the same. And then we add the images and the talk, okay? So what's happening in the body. And we started out sitting in the meditation hall of our center. And it's like, oh yeah, I can keep track of everything. There's a little hint of a little nervousness, and then there's some talk and some pictures of fantasy, whatever. But things are not that intense. So then, okay, so that's step 1. We're in the meditation hall. Step 2, get in the car. And things get a little more intense. Okay, we're now actually in the car. There's a little more talk, a little more feel in the body, etc. Now, okay, now we're driving. Uh-oh, now we see the Ferris wheel and the other, okay. But everything's still cool, okay? But more is happening. Then there's a few more sort of quantum leaps, which is you get out of the car, you get in line to buy the ticket, okay? That's like a whole little upping. Then you've got the ticket, and you're like about to sit in the ride, okay? And then you sit in the ride and they strap you in, okay? At that point, I started to freak, okay? I started to freak. And what? I couldn't tell you anything about what was happening in my body. I couldn't tell you what part of my thought was image or talk. All I knew is I am scared. I don't know if I can handle this. This is bad. I don't want this. Okay? And all specificity disappeared. I didn't know what was happening where. I just knew I can't handle it. But too late. Guess what? The ride started. Okay? So for the next 5 minutes, I am fighting. Fighting what? Fighting to get back to being precise about what's happening in my body. I know for sure my body is chock full of sensations, but I can't tell what's happening where. And I can't tell what part of my thought is verbal and what part is visual. I can't tell anything. And I'm furiously fighting my way back to specificity. Took about 5 minutes, and then suddenly I could feel the body again with precision. I could be aware of thoughts with precision, and guess what? The sense of freak out went away. So what happened was, at the moment of freak out, there was a precipitous and dramatic disappearance of the ability to just keep track of what was going on. You can try this experiment over and over again. Here's how we will define freak out as a technical term. Freak out within this context, this universe of discourse, will be you subjectively suffer or you objectively do something you regret. We'll call that freak out. As you move into a situation where you think you might freak out, keep track of body image talk, or just keep track of what's happening where, when in the body. Keep track of some part of your subjective experience with specificity. Watch as this thing becomes more challenging, At the moment of freak out, watch what happens to your specificity. It will vanish. It will vanish. You can try the experiment over and over and over again. You'll see it's the same every time. It doesn't matter what the circumstances are. It doesn't matter whether it's subjective freak out or objective distortion in behavior. When you lose it in terms of suffering or doing something you regret, you have lost it because you have lost specificity in awareness. Now, there's a principle in logic called the contrapositive. If A implies B, not B implies not A. So if people freaking out implies loss of specificity, not losing specificity implies no freak out. And that's what's being claimed here. Okay? You don't have to believe it. Just try it. Victoria?
I'd like to go back to a moment when you said bitmap, body image talk, and that we are at sort of a bitmap, and ask you how technology, digital technologies, affect our perception of identity, and if there's a way that we can use technology, in particular the internet, to visualize this flow that you're talking about. Do you see this having some kind of effect on our perception of identity or reaching that place of understanding the flow?
Yes. I won't go into a whole lot of detail, but I'll just say this much. I would see your question is basically, how does Western technology in general, and specifically computers and internet and so forth, relate to creating a bitmap in the sense that I'm using the word bitmap? I would see a two-tiered approach. One that is now doable and one that may be doable within 50 or 100 years. I should say that when I teach people these skills, I teach them interactively on a one-to-one basis. In other words, I will give a focusing procedure, and I will then ask the person what happens as the result of that focusing procedure. Based on what they say, I will either give them an interpretation, or I will say, okay, you could try this, this, or this for that reaction, and if you try A, there's this payoff but this liability. If you try B, there's this payoff but this, so they can make an informed choice. And I say, okay, so you can try one of these. And then I'll ask, okay, what happened when you tried that? And then depending on what they say, I'll say, okay, I suggest you do this, or you have these choices. And I take that person through an optimizing algorithm. An algorithm that optimizes their experience and also takes into account what I know about them, their previous experience, their skills, their weak areas, and so forth. If I work personally like that, interactively, I'm amazed at how the quality of meditation period that a person can have. But there's only one of me. Oh, well, I mean, there's other people that can do things like this, but, but there's probably not very many, okay, relative to the numbers of people that could use something like this. Well, without going into great detail, since this is an algorithmic procedure, we could conceivably use interactive multimedia artificial intelligence expert systems programs to replicate a certain proportion of this functionality and make it available massively to the people of the planet. That's tier one. Tier 2 is, well, today I had an interesting experience. I toured one of the premier brain imaging facilities on the planet here at UCLA. And I met one of the directors of the program there. That it's the Neuroimaging and Brain Mapping Center in the Ganda Goldschmidt here, huh? No, I didn't meet him, but I met one of his associates. It was interesting because, I mean, you know, he's a busy person and does a lot of things, you know. I understand what busy people are. He didn't really know why I was showing up in his laboratory exactly, or who I was, but and he sort of asked me, you know, well, you know, in a very friendly way, why are you here? What can I do for you, kind of thing. So I asked him if he had ever heard of meditation or mindfulness or knew about anything like that. And he said no, he didn't really know anything about that. So I thought, okay, so now maybe I got 20 minutes of this guy's time, and I'm going to try to explain who I am and what I'm about and why I want to be in his lab. So the idea occurred to me, okay, well, maybe I can think of a quick and dirty way to make him understand what I do. So I said, well, you've spent your life figuring out ways to image the brain structure and function. And I've spent my life also doing that. Okay, so now he thinks I'm in his field, okay? But then I said, but there's a difference, a big difference. I teach people to do this from the inside. I teach them to do what you do from the outside. And then I went into the whole spiel that I just gave you about how you can break down subjective experiences into components and observe them and why that has practical value and so forth. So I sort of explained what I did as making an internally generated functional MRI, basically. That's how one way to look at the mindfulness practice. And why I'm in your laboratory is that I'm interested in what would happen if we took your external technology with our internal technology together and see if there are correlations that we would be exploring for the inside and the outside. We would be taking two very powerful traditions of technology and seeing how they could cross-fertilize each other. Because I could give them ideas about what to look for, and they could give me neurophysiological correlates and put it in the language that is universally accepted by the entire world. I talked to, in other words, yes, I think that makes sense. If you look at the history of science, a situation that comes up from time to time is that there'll be two branches, two disciplines in science that are well developed, but have had independent courses. Suddenly, somebody finds a common ground between them, and a brand new science is born between them that is neither of the other ones. The most outstanding example of that is the interaction of geometry and algebra. Both of these had existed for many, many centuries and had developed in various cultures. Suddenly, in the 16th century, Fermat and Descartes realized that there is a natural link between algebraic equations and conic sections. Conic sections had been well studied by the Greeks 2,000 years, ago. Algebraic equations were developed by various cultures and whatever. But suddenly we have this thing called coordinate geometry. That's why we call it Cartesian coordinates, because it's associated with René Descartes, although Fermat first came up with the idea. Now, suddenly there's a link between the whole technology of geometry with all of its power and machinery, and the whole technology of algebra with its power and machinery. They're cross-fertilizing each other, leading to the development of mapping functions in time-space coordinates, which then allowed for the creation of calculus and analysis, which now gives birth to an entirely new kind of mathematics that is completely different from algebra or geometry. So I have to ask myself if the imaging technologies that look at the brain from the outside and the, quote, imaging technology that looks at subjective experience from the inside, which is called mindfulness or vipassana meditation, if those two started to cross-fertilize each other, what weird and wonderful hybrid might arise from that that we can't even imagine at this time, that might allow for the classical Enlightenment experiences to be available to the great masses of humanity, which has never been the case previously.
So in a sense, it would accelerate the evolution of
It would
consciousness.
accelerate the evolution of the planet, or prevent its destruction.
I just want to comment that this is, I don't know if this is synchronistic, but there's a program on KCET tonight, which I'm recording. There's a program on KCET tonight, which I'm recording, and it's got to do with like robotics and the mind and the brain and medicine. And I'm just standing here wondering if there's just some of what you're talking about going on in this particular program, which I'm videotaping right now as I'm sitting here listening to you.
There was an article, was it in Newsweek or Time, just a couple weeks ago, about the brain's hard wiring to spirituality. So, and that's in the mass media now at this point. It's something that I've been talking about for over a decade, or been interested in exploring. Basically, my fantasy is to teach mindfulness meditation at Caltech or MIT, where I can get in front of an audience of geeks and say, apply, or UCLA. The sense that I can say, the sense of subjective self can be modeled as an abstract phase space, the dimensions of which are body, sensation, mental image, and internal talk. And what is known as the spirit is in fact the differential operator applied to that phase space. And everybody will say, oh, I understand what spirit is now. When the Star Trek series came out, and you had this sort of pseudo-Asian thing about the Force, with the dark side and the light side, it's obviously Qi. It's Taoism, right? There's the Force, right? And then I remember the born-again Christians started to have the bumper stickers that said the Force is God. And it's true. But think of the Newtonian concept of force. What is force? Force is proportional to acceleration. If you want to see how a force field is, if you want to image a force field, you have to look at how it accelerates particles. When you look at your body image talk, activating and deactivating, and you start to pay attention to rates of change there, you are directly observing accelerations and decelerations. You are observing the invisible force of the Holy Spirit molding your existence moment by moment. It is the differential operator. It is the first and second time derivatives of the rates of change of your body image talk arisings. It's quite analogous. And what gets in the way of that flow, what the Buddha called grasping, what the Christians call sin, what separates us from flowing with the Spirit is something analogous to friction in a mechanical system, or viscosity in a hydrodynamic system, or impedance in an alternating circuit. Science couldn't get anywhere until you can find the variables and quantify them. We can measure impedance in ohms, okay? We can measure viscosity in poise, or centipoise, or we have units for it, okay? Someday we'll have units for equanimity and its opposite, grasping. And in other words, there are the Maxwell field equations. It's like 4 equations that basically explain electromagnetic activity. And they're differential equations based on observing fields behaving for long periods of time until they got these basic principles. Well, I think there's something like that in the brain. And there are neurophysiological correlates of our own self-impedance. And when we find them, we can get rid of it. Maybe by pulsing the brain. We have artificial pacemakers that pulse the heart. Maybe some vastly more complex computer-based timing system could get the viscosity out of the brain's flow. So that, and it could be a tiny little chip that basically works the timing circuits in the brain so that the brain doesn't get in its own way and people can directly flow with the Spirit. It seems almost irreverent to say it, but I can imagine that something like that could happen in the future. And maybe will need to happen. So I see the machinery as potentially actually becoming the great ally of spirituality. In the sense that I would use the word spirituality, which is a very nuts and bolts, it's got to deliver the goods. It can't just be an idea that makes you feel good for a little while. Well, maybe one last one. Philip?
You mentioned that babies are naturally in that flow.
Some of the time, yes.
So what can you do in terms of, observing them, or, experiments, or learning from them? Or what can we learn from them at this point, since they are in the flow?
At this point, I actually have a tape that I call Zen Parenting. In a Zen temple, here's how it works. You go in for an interview with the Zen master. Supposedly you're working on things like what is the sound of one hand clapping or something like that, at least on the surface, ostensibly. But in fact, what you're doing is you're merging with the flow of that teacher while you're with that teacher, whether you're aware of it or not. After a little while, you become aware that that's what's happening. In other words, to be a Zen master means that you're able to flow with impermanence, to expand and contract with the Spirit. The viscosity in the substance of your soul has been somewhat worked through. So every sound that person utters, the way that their head turns, all of their gestures sort of convey that they are riding on this flow. So when you're with a person like that, in the Zen interview, you're really sort of merging with that person's flow, at first unconsciously, and then later consciously. Then you go back from the meditation hall, and you sit and meditate, and you then see how much you can apply what you have picked up from that teacher to dealing with having to sit there in the cold with or in the summer with mosquitoes. You apply it to the real world right away. Okay, your legs hurt, you're sleepy. So unlike where you're just getting a zap of energy from a guru and then you just sort of go off and enjoy it, in the Zen tradition you have an interview with the teacher. Yes, you pick up something, and then you have to go in the hall and do the same ass-busting practice that that teacher did and faced the same challenges and whatever, but you've internalized a little bit. And then after a little while that wears off, and guess what? Just about the time for your next interview. So there is an alternation of being with this teacher and incorporating some of their flow by paying. Remember, when you see the flower, if there's no bit reactions, you are the flower. When you see the Zen master, if there's no bit reactions, you are the Zen master. You become, to a certain extent, that not that person's personality, I should hope not, okay? But rather that person's impersonality you incorporate, a little bit at a time, no pun intended. So then you go back on the cushion and you integrate that and make it yours. Now, so there's this alternation of merging and picking up energy and then going off and working on your own. Now consider every human parent. There are two parents. And I think nature has set it up that way for a reason. When you're with a neonate or a very young child, that their connection with the spirit, with the force, with the flow is not severed yet, okay? They move the way a Zen master moves. When you're paying attention, caring for your child, you can also be consciously merging with their flow. You're getting an interview with a Zen master, okay? Then you give the baby to the other parent for a little while, right? And you can actually go off and consciously incorporate what you have just learned from your baby into your being, okay? If you wanted to. So that you would be, if you don't consciously merge with the baby, and then you don't go off and then intentionally integrate that experience with even, let's say, 5 minutes of formal practice, then you won't really get as deep a tutelage from your baby as you could. In fact, you won't get much. You'll just be sort of taking care of the baby. But if you consciously merge with that baby, yeah, we have potential Zen parents right over there. Simply,
what's the technique for conscious merging?
Is you're touching the baby, you're looking at the baby, you're hearing the baby. Just touch, hear, and look without any talk, image, or feel reactions to that. Then you're merging with the baby, okay? That's one way to merge with the baby. And you watch very carefully, you'll see that the basic energy within the baby is expansion and contraction. The baby will sometimes expand, sometimes contract, sometimes do both at the same time. And then that starts to sort of wear off on you. But unless you consciously merge, it won't wear off all that much. And even if you consciously merge, you have to go off by yourself for a while. And if only for 5 minutes, you integrate the effect of that. You really sort of sit. And that's why it's good that there's two parents, because one can take care of the baby and merge with the baby, because the baby becomes your monastery now. You can't do retreats anymore. You got to take care of the baby. But then if the baby is in fact your teacher, not in any metaphorical sense, but in a literal sense, in an energetic sense, that you're actually being impacted by their flow, if the baby is now your teacher, you're not going to miss the fact that you can't come to retreats as much, because you're on constant retreat with your baby. But if you set it up between the parents so that one cares and then is also incorporating the baby, and then they get a little break period, if only for 5 or 10 minutes, where they can go off and do just a very short formal period where they internalize what they have learned from the energy flow of the baby, then you've more or less set up your parenting situation to model a Zen monastery. Does that make sense? And if you do that month after month, year after year, that could have an incredible effect on your spiritual growth. Of course, taking care of the baby will have an effect on your spiritual growth anyway. But if you do it with a conscious intention along the lines that I mentioned, it could have like going off to a monastery kind of effect on your spiritual practice. Does that make sense? Yeah. I call that Zen parenting. Did that answer your question about what we can do now? Like any parent can do that now, anywhere in the world, if they look at things this way.
Is that related to like learning from nature, like pine trees and cats and butterflies and all that?
Yes, but see, pine trees and cats and butterflies flow, but they're not really humans. A baby is a human that's flowing, and a Zen master is a human that's flowing. And it's much easier for, like attracts like, it's much easier for human to merge with human than it is for human to merge with butterfly. So you get more, it's a different quality. So basically a baby is a Zen master that doesn't speak at all. Everything else is the same as a Zen master, a mute Zen master. And that's what infant means. Infans in Latin means infantus, the one that is not speaking. But then there's also Zen, there's two parts. There's Zen parenting after the baby is born. But then there's Zen birthing, or mindful birthing, which Maroon is shaking his head because I guided his wife through that process. And it's quite a process, okay?
We have you booked, right?
Huh?
We have you booked.
Yeah, you got me. When's the little one due? Wow, 2 days before my birthday. And I will be in Vermont. I'm going nowhere. So around that time, give me a call. The same services are available. Basically, it's all expansion and contraction. That's how the universe gives birth to us, moment by moment. The bit, our bit self, our body image talk, on very close investigation, you will see arises in the folds of expanding, contracting space. Just like a physical body arises in the folds of an expanding, contracting, a physical baby arises in the folds of an expanding and contracting womb. As you learn to complete